ladies and gentlemen. My name is Annie Chen. I will be your MC for today, and thank you once again for joining us for this special event. Welcome to the 2018 Promoting a Free and Open Indo-Pacific Region, Indo-Pacific Security Dialogue. It's a true honor that we have a full house here, and we welcome you sincerely. To begin with our conference, it's always grateful that we have people who guided us, and for this particular conferences, it is an honor that we are going to welcome Chairman of the Prospect Foundation, Dr. Chen Tong-Sun, to give us his opening remarks. For him guided us through the whole conference. Dr. Chen, the floor is all yours.
Mr. Wu, Dr. Freeman, Mrs. Channel, Dr. Shuado, Elmo Stavridis. There are many distinguished guests coming from different parts of the world. So I want to say, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Good morning. Ohayou gozaimasu. On behalf of the Prospect Foundation, I would like to welcome you to the 2018 Indo-Pacific Security Dialogue. It is an honor and a privilege to co-host this event with the Center for New American Security from the United States and the Sasakawa Peace Foundation from Japan. We appreciate your efforts to make this meaningful event happen. In the meantime, though, I would also like to express our appreciation to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs for your support. We certainly could not do it without your help. Thank you. In 2017, Trump administration started to reconceptualize the so-called Indo-Pacific region, an important issue which we also touched upon in the dialogue last year. Today, we are going to continue our conversation about the Indo-Pacific to look for a substantive ways to promote a free and open Indo-Pacific region together, and hence hoping we can maintain prosperity in this region. In recent years, people talked about a lot about the successful economic performance of the Indo-Pacific region. And I had the chance to visit many Asian countries and India in the last 2 years. Seeing is believing, has been said, and I believe it. I'm very impressed by the energetic people, their vibrant society, and the rapid development there. So I think, although there are various challenges still ahead, but these countries, I believe, will continue to lead the economic growth of the world, which shows why Indo-Pacific is so essential and so important from the economical sense. So as the countries in the region becomes the engine of global economic growth, I think everybody understands and agree with this. So the trade routes in the region also become one of the busiest in the world. So this is a very important fact. For instance, nearly one-third of global maritime trade moves through the South China Sea, so which consists of 5.3 trillion US dollars worth of goods every year. However, factors like the major power competition, geopolitical confrontation, sovereignty disputes, transnational crimes, as well as the mutual disaster are challenging the peace and stability of the region, which makes the Indo-Pacific also very important geopolitically. So given the geo-economic and geopolitical significance of the Indo-Pacific, it deserves us to spend our time on sharing our understanding and vision of the region, especially when the peace and stability of the region have been increasingly threatened, and no country can face their challenges alone. No country can face the challenge alone. It explains why we need to gather brilliant minds from the region to find out ways to protect our common interest jointly together in such a joint fashion. I think it's necessary. Now, recently, China conducted a frequent military exercise over Taiwan Strait, Miyako Strait, and Bashi Channel. They militarized the South China Sea and established an aggressive presence in the Indian Ocean and keep demonstrating its so-called sharp power. These moves not only destabilize the region, but also threaten the international order. I think this is the point. They are threatening the international order. So to balance the Chinese assertive moves, we must do the best we can to keep the region free and open. Taiwan, as a responsible regional member, respects the international law and continues to contribute to the peace and the sustainable development of the region. Despite the natural and the political limitations, our beautiful island, Taiwan, is the 22nd largest economy in the world, with a vibrant democracy. Taiwanese people could do and are willing to share our economic model and the democracy with the world. Even though the United Nations, its framework has excluded Taiwan, we still are keen to share our resources with the like-minded countries and friends fighting against terrorism, international crime, natural disaster, and guarding the rights of humankind. As we know, since our president, Tsai Ing-wen, took office, her administration proposed the so-called New Southbound policy, aiming to enhance exchanges with countries in the Indo-Pacific region and creating new developing momentum for Taiwan and the regional countries alike. So this is Taiwan's initiative move in promoting a free and open Indo-Pacific region. But there are more Taiwan and other countries can do together. And this leads to my conclusion that it is extremely important for us to gather together here today. So I believe we will find the areas for concrete collaboration through constructive dialogue. So with this kind of thinking, this kind of thought in mind, I would like to thank you all for joining the meaningful event and hope our conference a great success. So thank you very much for this morning. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you, Chairman Chen. And as Chairman Chen has mentioned, that whenever there is an event, you cannot never do it single-handedly. It always comes through cooperation and strong supports from friends. And it is a true honor that we have a strong friend who has always been very supportive, and that is the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And now please join me in welcoming Minister of Foreign Affairs, Dr. Zhao Xie Joseph Wu, to give us his opening remarks. Thank you.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It is a great pleasure to be here for the first time as the Minister of Foreign Affairs. Before I begin, I would like to recognize some in the audience. The first, of course, is our Admiral Stavridis, and of course, former Deputy National Security Advisor Nadia Shetlo. Thank you very much for coming all the way to Taiwan. We also have Congresswoman Eddie Bernice Johnson. We just met in Houston not long ago, and appreciate it very much for keep coming back to Taiwan. And we also have two parliamentarians from Japan, Suzuki-san and Masukawa-san, and they are very good friends of Taiwan. We also have legislators from Taiwan ourselves. From where I can see, we have Luo Zizhen and Liu Shifang, and I know there will be a few more joining us later. The Executive Director of the Sasakawa Peace Foundation, Junko Chano, Senior Fellow at the Center for New American Security, Daniel Kleeman, Prospect Foundation, Mark Chen, and also President Lai Zhong of the Prospect Foundation. Of course, there are also moderators, panelists, and distinguished members of the Diplomatic Corps. Thank you very much for participating and making this event possible. I also want to express my appreciation for the Prospect Foundation, the Center for New American Security, and the Sasakawa Peace Foundation for holding this forum and choosing a topic that is so relevant to our times. While we may not be the first country to talk about the Indo-Pacific, we have given this a lot of thought, and we look forward to discussing it with all of you today. The Indo-Pacific has never been more relevant. It's a region that has been at the center of trade, power, and culture of millennia. And today, it is a region home to the majority of the world's population and many of the world's fastest growing economies. How this region develops, whether it will remain free and prosperous, with countries interacting with each other on the basis of equality and respect, will shape the security of 4 billion people and the future of our world. How do we define the Indo-Pacific? As one US official once suggested to me, it's a region that stretches from the heart of the Pacific, which is Hawaii, all the way to the Indian subcontinent. It includes everything from the emergency economies of Southeast Asia to the South Pacific, which is home to 6 of Taiwan's diplomatic allies. It is a region that on the surface bears little in common, but in fact has shared the same dividends of peace and fruits of rule-based order that has existed for the past 70 years. How we maintain peace and rule-based order will be key questions going forward. I believe these are questions all like-minded democracies are struggling to answer. And certainly, they are driving countries like the United States, Australia, Japan, and Taiwan, and India to come up with our own forms of an Indo-Pacific strategy. Given that all of us are striving to answer the same questions and respond to the same set of emerging challenges, I know there's an ample opportunity to work together. To start, I want to share Taiwan's perspective on the Indo-Pacific. Our view towards Indo-Pacific is guided by our value. We see democracy as one of the most important factors underlying a free and open Indo-Pacific. It is what will keep the region peaceful, stable, and prosperous for many years to come. Therefore, there is a need for like-minded countries to strengthen democratic institutions around the region. In this area, Taiwan can help. Our experiences in democratization and building a robust civil society can serve as a model for others. We are ready and prepared to lend a helping hand. We also see tangible components to greater cooperation in the Indo-Pacific. Countries like the United States and Japan are working to drive greater public and private investment into the region under our new southbound policy. We are able to complement those efforts. Our policy has given us a 2-year head start in building a commercial and industrial presence in South and Southeast Asia. We are eager to work with all willing partners to form industrial partnership and engage in experience sharing. We also see tremendous potential in infrastructure. The deficit in infrastructure spending across South and Southeast Asia is well documented. To address this, we have put aside $3.5 billion to support infrastructure and development projects in countries covered by our new southbound policy. This represents our belief that Taiwan, with our expertise in transportation, logistics, and construction, can play a bigger role in the future development of the region. Finally, we believe that there's also a security dynamic to the idea of Indo-Pacific. As many have pointed out, we do not intend to inhibit the rights of any particular country. But for many of us, it is an opportunity to strengthen our sense of collective security. It is a reminder for like-minded countries to come together and stand as one if we are to defend the rights of the countries to be treated with equality and respect, and remain free from coercion. In many respects, Taiwan is an ideal partner for like-minded countries in their pursuit of an Indo-Pacific strategy. We have much to offer in terms of our trade, investment, and expertise. We also have much to share. We are on the front line in the defense of freedom, democracy, and all the values that we so deeply cherish. The threats we face are the same fundamental challenges posed to the freedom, openness, and prosperity of the region as a whole. We view a free and open Indo-Pacific as a collective effort, and an idea only possible if like-minded countries are willing to work together in the spirit of dialogue and cooperation. And in this regard, this forum today is an ideal opportunity to look at Taiwan's place in the Indo-Pacific and a free and open Indo-Pacific region as a whole. I want to again thank you very much for spending time outside your very busy schedule to be here in Taiwan. I look forward to this event being a great success. I know it will. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister Wu. Ladies and gentlemen, unfortunately, Minister Wu has a really busy schedule today, so he won't be able to join us for the rest of the conference. But once again, thank you, Minister Wu, to be coming personally to greet this event. So, ladies and gentlemen, even though Minister Wu is not going to be with us for the day, but I can assure you that the surprise and the excitedness of this event is not going to be undermined by that, because we have a really, really special keynote speech for this opening session, as it is an honor that we have invited Admiral James Stavridis, the former Superior Allied Commander at NATO, to act it as our opening keynote speech. Admiral, the floor is all yours.
Well, good morning, everybody. It's a pleasure to be back in Taiwan. I came here for the first time 40 years ago on a U.S. Navy destroyer and pulled into the port of Keelung and spent a good couple of days here in Taipei. Then we went to Kaohsiung down in the south, and it is marvelous to see the extraordinary voyage, the trajectory of this nation. I have enjoyed watching it from afar, and it's a pleasure to be back with you today. What I'd like to talk about, and I'm going to show a few simple images, photographs really, is Indo-Asia. What are the challenges and what are the opportunities? And how does Taiwan fit into all that? Let me begin simply by stepping back into history for a moment. This is a chart from 1589 showing what the Europeans thought this body of water, this massive Pacific Ocean looked like. On the bottom right there, you see the Polynesians who sailed across these waters. This is an ancient region of the world. The United States has been here for some period of time, but let's look back at mariners in this region. You see that very small ship in the photograph? That is the vessel that Christopher Columbus sailed to discover the New World. It's tiny. That was in 1490. That massive ship behind it was being sailed in these waters at the same time by the Chinese Admiral Zheng He. It was 500 feet long, the largest wooden warship ever built. These waters are ancient waters. The United States came here as part of the Second World War, when we had more aircraft carriers in our Navy than we do ships today. So the United States is a relatively recent arrival to this region, but I hope that my nation will continue to engage in this region, particularly with Taiwan. But there is a new force rising in this region, as we all know. These are Chinese ballistic missile submarines operated by the People's Republic of China. You may have seen a story in the New York Times yesterday that points out that China now has more ships than the U.S. Navy. That's an interesting statistic. It does not tell the real story of capability, but it makes the point that there is a new force rising, and we must understand the implications of that. We see the Chinese Navy operating all over the world. Here is a port visit of a Chinese destroyer to Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. We see China operating in the Baltic Sea, in the north of Europe, alongside Russian warships. So China's Navy is expanding. It will continue to be a significant player in this region. And I think the greatest geopolitical challenge to peace in the region is this. It is the construction of artificial islands throughout the South China Sea. And I hope today, in our conversations, as we talk about promoting a free and open Indo-Pacific region, I think we have to address the challenges that result from this kind of militarization of international waters. In fairness, these views by the Chinese are based on that historical set of claims. That's why I began with that. It is important that we have an open dialogue with the PRC to understand why they feel they should be able to claim this entire body of water within the 9-dashed line. I think that claim is not supported by international law, but we have to understand it so we can have a fruitful dialogue, so we can avoid conflict in this region. Now, we also see not just Chinese warships, but also Chinese Coast Guard and even civilian craft operating in these waters. All of that contributes to tension. It does not mean we are destined for a war at all. We can resolve this diplomatically. We must resolve this diplomatically, but it will require a great deal of effort from both sides. Now, there's a tactical challenge as well to all of this, and it's right there. It's North Korea. We cannot speak about a peaceful and open Indo-Pacific region without addressing the rise of North Korea's nuclear program. And this is going to be a challenge for the international order. This is not the job of the United States to solve. I think the United States will have an important role to play, but it will require all of the nations of this region, and really all of the nations globally, putting pressure on the regime of Kim Jong-un. And we talk a lot about his nuclear program. He also has an enormous conventional force which directly threatens South Korea, as well as continuing to move his ballistic missile capability. When I put all of that together, I see North Korea and integrating it ultimately into the international system peacefully as the tactical challenge that sits alongside the strategic challenge of finding our way through the disagreements we have strategically in the region. So those are some of the challenges we have to deal with. What's the good news? Well, let's start with nations like Taiwan, a strong friend, partner to the United States and also to other nations in this region. As the chairman said earlier, the 22nd largest economy in the world, only 23 million people generating an enormous GDP, capable and professional armed forces. Taiwan is part of the solution in this part of the world. So is Japan. I was asked a question earlier by the press here at a small press conference I did about Taiwan-Japanese relations. I think they are very important. I am happy to see representatives of the Diet here today, and I honor them for coming. That relationship has historical parts to it, but it, more importantly, is part of the future of this region. And the United States has the closest of relations with Japan. And I think that that can be part of the solution in this region. We also have a challenge between China and Japan. These are, of course, the Senkaku Diaoyu Islands. This has been relatively quiet because of diplomatic efforts back and forth between those two nations. This is an example, I think, of how we could ultimately approach the challenges in the South China Sea. So Taiwan, Japan, who else? South Korea, another miracle economy. When you look at the progress of Taiwan, you look at the progress of South Korea, look at that photograph on the upper right. If you ever had a question about a political and economic solution to adopt for your nation, look at that chart. Those two nations started at the same point at the end of the Korean War. Today, Pyongyang has a tiny economy, almost no infrastructure. South Korea's economy is even larger than that of Taiwan. It is an extraordinary story and also a good potential partner in the region. There are other nations. These are Marines from the Philippines. We see Vietnam's forces increasing in capability. All of this is to say that the solutions to the challenges are in collective action together, principally diplomatic, economic, but working together for security as well. And of course, this was the concept for the Trans-Pacific Partnership. Sadly, the United States has walked away from this. Japan continues to work toward constructing this. It is an example over time of how the economic instruments, alongside the political and the diplomatic, can help resolve the challenges in this region. So it is a rich basket of challenges. We've named some of them. Right about now, you should say, well, what is the role of the United States? Can the United States overcome its political gridlock? Can it avoid isolationism? I say the answer is yes. The United States will help think its way through the challenges in Asia. We do not aim to be the dominant nation of the Pacific, but we aim to be part of finding opportunities in the region. So let me close my brief remarks and open up for some questions with a few very quick thoughts on these opportunities. What should we do to create dialogue together? We should start with this. We should listen better. This, by the way, is not Photoshop. This is an actual air defense system from 1925, 100 years ago. He is listening for incoming aircraft. I put it here as metaphor. We must listen better to each other, to our allies, partners, and friends, but also to those with whom we have disagreements. We need to read more and think about this region. Here are some books by writers from the United States about the region. We need to read these as well as reading the comparable works of literature and political science from Taiwan, from Japan, from China as well. We need more conferences like this, where we come together and have a dialogue realistically about these opportunities. We need to work together to address the challenges in the South China Sea. We need to build large coalitions to address global problems. This is the coalition against the Islamic State. Look closely. You'll see flags from this region, Australia, New Zealand, others. We need to think more about India. We need to put the Indo in the Indo-Pacific region. This is the Golden Temple of Amritsar. It is sacred to the Sikh faith. I put it here as a symbol of the rise of India in this century. We spend a lot of time talking about the rise of China. In 300 years, when historians write the history of the 21st century, much of it will be about the rise of India. And in this regard, I am particularly encouraged by the growing relationship between Japan, India, and the United States. This is an image from a recent naval exercise conducted by those nations together, three very capable maritime nations, an example of collective security operating together. There's also a role for private sector. These are large maritime companies operating. This private-public partnership to help us understand the health of the oceans, the commerce in the oceans, $5 trillion of commercial activity in the South China Sea, understanding that and integrating it into our conversations is part of creating real security. And lastly, soft power. The minister a moment ago talked about Chinese sharp power. I would argue soft power, medical diplomacy, and many other tools can be part of creating real security in the region. So let me close by saying, as I look out at the oceans today, they don't look like the graphic behind me, nice calm sea. The oceans today look more like this. There will be challenges. Things will go wrong. But I would argue that if we apply the tools I've talked about today, dialogue, diplomacy, collective defense, the economic instruments, private-public cooperation, if we integrate those together, we can create calm seas ahead. Thank you very much. Pleasure to be with you.
Thank you, Admiral. And Admiral has kindly decided that he will be opened up to questions. Just a few points. If you raise your questions, please identify yourself and please keep your questions crisp and short so Admiral will have time to respond. We don't want long questions. So any questions from the floor? Right over there.
Thank you, Admiral Stavridis. I just have a very quick questions. In your lecture, you mentioned that conversations and discussions are very necessary. In your previous lectures and speeches, you also mentioned the utilization of smart power. And in your article earlier this year, you also contended that China's President Xi's consolidation of power will make China an even more formidable competitor to the United States in East Asia and around the globe. So I was wondering if you could further elaborate on the extent to which where Taiwan and the United States could both work together to utilize sharp power in order to balance China's increasing aggressive stance in the Indo-Pacific. And I forgot to mention, I am Katie Chen, Vice President of the Taiwan Foundation for Democracy. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The question is, how can the United States and Taiwan work together using smart power, which is principally some of these ideas of soft power backed up by collective defense. I showed you a photograph a moment ago of a massive U.S. hospital ship, the Mercy. I think that medical diplomacy is an area where we could work together. I think humanitarian operations, working with nations that need assistance in building clinics and schools and wells, for example, for clean water. I think that working together in counter-pandemic situations and preparing for a response to that kind of natural disaster is crucial and important. I mentioned earlier economic integration. How can we create bilateral or multilateral trade agreements that enable a freer flow of goods back and forth? How about student exchanges? We had, for example, the chairman who has a PhD from Purdue University. We have Minister Wu, who has a PhD from Ohio State University. Where are the student exchanges? How can we create that kind of human capital moving back and forth between the United States, Taiwan, and other nations we talk about? In the same vein, sports diplomacy, our athletes exchanging opportunities to compete together. There are many, many ways, and all of these may seem individually like small actions, and yet taken together, collectively, they create real security. That's how I would answer the question. Thank you.
Thank you, Admiral. Right over here.
My name is Chonglun Guo. I'm working for the United Daily News. China had been sending its Coast Guard vessels and naval vessels to the continuous water of Diaoyu or Shenke Island, as you mentioned. But China and Japan had managed, through diplomatic efforts, somehow to calm down the situation and ease the tension. My question is mostly regarding with the South China Sea, that the US Navy had been doing the freedom of navigation operation in this area. Do you see the tension between China and the United States will go up, or it can follow the previous example by talking or through diplomatic way to calm it down?
An excellent question, and as I mentioned earlier, I compliment our Japanese colleagues who are here today for the way in which they have used a mixture of diplomacy and security to deal with this challenge. My friend Professor Joseph Nye, who, if you will, invented the idea of soft power, once said that soft power without the ability to apply hard power is no power. And I think that's right. Part of the way that the solution to the Senkaku dispute has occurred is because Japan and its defense forces have operated there. The United States has operated there in support. China sees that, sees a resolute front, and then feels compelled to come to the table of diplomacy. I think that will be the same trajectory in the South China Sea. We must operate through these international waters, and it cannot just be the United States. It must be our friends from Australia, and New Zealand, and Japan, and France, and the United Kingdom, and others, because all of us, all of our nations have an interest in freedom of the high seas, international waters that are free to all to transit. If we show a resolute face in that, over time, I do believe China will be more willing to negotiate, to have a diplomatic solution. I'll close by saying we will not solve this by snapping our fingers. This will take time. It will require patience, but we must solve it. This, I think, is the biggest geostrategic challenge in the region, and the place where the potential for conflict is the highest. We must avoid that, but it does require a resolute face to the challenges. Thank you.
Thank you, Admiral. I see a question right over there. That's that gentleman in the second row.
My name is Arthur Dean. I'm a retired professor from National Zhenzi University. I appreciate your very brief remark, and I'm really interested in the book you write about the so-called sea power, but I have to confess, I have not read yet. Sorry about but
That's okay. You can read it tonight.
yeah. I know there have been a Chinese translation has been rolled out yet already. My question is a little bit theoretical, because you talk about the sea power, but these days technology evolve. So we enter so-called cyber stage, we enter so-called space stage. Then how the naval or the sea power will be impacted by the cyber or space? Yeah, it's a little bit theoretical question.
Thank you. Excellent question. The question is, how will sea power be impacted by the emergence of cyber and space? And space. And this is a very, very appropriate question for today. First of all, let's take space. And here we see broad area surveillance getting better and better, more persistent, more defined. And believe me, over time, the ability from satellites to see where submarines are operating beneath the waters will change forever the way sea power is applied. That is coming, and it will be in 10 years or 50 years, but eventually that's an example of persistent surveillance from space that will impact the maritime world. Cyber, similarly, as all of these platforms that we talked about today rely on this backbone of cyber capability, the ability to intrude into that from distance is increasing relentlessly and makes it much more difficult, for example, to track merchant fleets where they are operating, to use big data to analyze patterns of movement. So we will see space and cyber impact sea power, impact the maritime world dramatically over the next 10 years, I predict. That's why, and I'll close on this, I think it is a smart move on the part of the US to create a space force, small but capable, and ultimately a cyber force. I believe all nations will find that they are going to need capability in those two areas as well as in the maritime sphere in order to maintain security on the oceans and thus the impact ashore. Again, thank you very much for having me here today, Annie. It's a pleasure. I look forward to the rest of the conference and above all, Chairman, to the dinner tonight when we will continue to interact together and solve these great challenges. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Admiral. Once again, please join me in thanking Admiral Sarvis for his excellent keynote speech of laying out the challenges that we face, but as well as telling us that it is through collective actions and diplomatic means that we're going to be able to solve this problem. As our co-hosts from the United States, our delegates from India, and our co-hosts from Japan, this is a collective manner. And we will now go into a break. For that, we are going to reorganize the stage. So we will reconvene at 9:45. We'll reconvene at 9:45. Thank you.